everybody's mobile phone off or you'll answer to me. And normally that works, but I have to be really polite to this assembled audience. So please would you turn your mobiles on vibrate or mute or off? That'd be great. What else do we need to say? Nothing else, I don't think. Emergency exits we've talked about. And now you're all focused on me, thinking I'm going to say something really intelligent. But while we're just waiting for our last guest, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, because I'm going to introduce the guests individually. I'm Sahil Rahman. I'm from originally Chester, born and raised, a true Cestrian. The very first South Asian baby born in the city back in 1966. Birthday is next week, so cards and presents are gratefully received. I started my media career at the BBC as a trainee assistant producer in Wales, rose up the ranks and joined Granada in 1995 as a reporter on Granada Reports with the late great Bob Greaves and Tony Wilson, who you'll know from the Hacienda Club, and with Lucy Meacock, who were the main presenters at the time. I won RTS there for my reporting, and then was spotted by Al Jazeera around about 2003, 2004, when they started to talk to me after they saw me hosting the Channel 4 series on Islamic law. And there was 2 seasons of that on Channel 4. It went global, and they approached me and made me an offer that I couldn't refuse, which involved cream cakes and 2 business class trips home every year. 20 successful years. I've covered everything from 5 general elections in South Asia, earthquakes, the Eurovision Song Contest, political assassinations, natural disasters, you name it, I've done it. I think my proudest moment was in 2023. I was the face of the channel for the coronation of King Charles III. Second, sorry. There may be a third in the future, yeah. He is the third, isn't he? He is, yeah. Okay. The second one, yeah. I'm getting very excited about this, you see. So, ready to go, are we? I want to talk about me a little bit more, Cece. Such a spoil sport. Right, here we go. A very good evening to you. Welcome to the Frontline Club. I've already told you who I am, so let's discuss who's on the panel this evening. Our panellist sitting next to me is the MSF UK Executive Director, Dr. Natalie Roberts. Next to her, Amnesty International's UK Chief Executive, Sasha Deshmukh, and MSF's Project Coordinator, Caroline Williman, who's just returned from Gaza. Good to see you. And Yara Eid, who is an award-winning Palestinian journalist and human rights activist. Joining us also from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, we will have on the big screen Dr. Mohammed Abu Maghassib. He's MSF's Deputy Medical Coordinator in Gaza. And also on line, we have Al Jazeera's Gaza Bureau Chief Wael Dahdoud live from the Qatari capital, Doha, with the network's principal interpreter, Tawfiq, who's actually here on the side, who will translate for Wael, who we can see now. Assalamu alaikum. Good to see you, Wael. We'll speak to you in a moment. The catastrophic situation in Gaza reflects decades of continuing repression and an Israeli-imposed blockade from 2007 on the Gaza Strip. The latest major escalation between Israel and Gaza occurred on October the 7th, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel on a huge scale, killing over 1,000 people and injuring 4,800 others. 250 people were also taken hostage. Some of those are still being held by Hamas today. And in response, Israel launched massive attacks on Gaza. We've all seen the images over the last 23 months, the deaths, the injuries, the destruction, the horrors of the bombardment of Gaza. There's still no end in sight. And following Tuesday's attack by Israel on Doha, a peace deal really does seem further away now than it ever has before. MSF teams are seeing firsthand the campaign of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians being pursued by the Israeli military in Gaza and the UK government's failure to prevent and punish these atrocities. Amnesty International also says that the UK government's response has fallen far short of what we would expect. Its failure to act decisively to stop the genocide not only breaches international obligations, but also reflects a lack of leadership on the international stage. It's quite obvious, isn't it, that the world is watching, and history and the courts will judge. Israel is being challenged on the issue in a case at the International Court of Justice at The Hague in the Netherlands. So let's just remind ourselves of some of the testimonies from the people who've been urging the world to listen and act for almost or nearly 2 years.
Gaza health system was already a fragile system. What remains is a shell that isn't functioning.
Catastrophic is the best word to describe it. There's a shortage of food, there's a shortage of fuel, there's a shortage of medical supplies and equipment.
What do you think the consequences of that could be from a humanitarian point of view?
I mean, the consequences are clearly going to be catastrophic, to take over the entire territory, the entire civilian population, and put them under military control. I think, that's essentially, a death sentence for many, many people.
If this mass starvation happens, that we're being told may well happen, what will be the impact on the population?
It's going to impact it in every single way imaginable. I mean, firstly, people are going to die. Kids are going to die. The most vulnerable people are going to die quite quickly.
We have documented an unprecedented scale, speed, and seriousness of inhumane acts in Gaza. Palestinians are facing overwhelming trauma and pain.
It is the most cruel thing I have ever seen in my life. To deprive people of food in the way that has been done here, to shoot at them, to kill them, to injure them when they try to get food.
You must demand that justice be delivered, that all those responsible for the genocide be held to account. Perpetrators benefit from the inaction and the complicity of too many of our political leaders.
I say it again, without an immediate ceasefire, without sustained medical and humanitarian access, there will be nothing left to save. Not the hospitals, not the patients, and not the future.
Well, there you have just some of the voices of what we have, or represent what we've seen and heard over the past 23 months. So let's cross over now to Doha, where we're joined now by Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief, Wael Dahdouh, who's been really a global symbol of resilience and truth telling amidst the horrific targeting of journalists in Gaza. Wael, it's good to have you with us. I know you can understand English, but we're going to be speaking to you through a translator here in London. We know that you yourself have experienced devastating personal loss in these last 2 years. And many people do ask that question, how do you carry out your work while still experiencing these very personal experiences within your own family structure?
أتوجه لكم بالتحية لكل شخص منكم من المتحدثين والمستمعين كل باسمه ولقبه، وبالتأكيد كنت أود أن أكون بينكم ولكن شاءت الظروف هكذا. لكن على أي حال الأهم هو تسليط الضوء على هذه القضية التي تهم البشرية بالكامل.
Thank you very much indeed for allowing me the opportunity, and my greetings to all the panelists and the ladies and gentlemen in the audience. And definitely I like to be with you, but due to circumstances beyond my control, I wasn't able to, but I'm still glad to have the opportunity to share with you this event.
So Wael, can you describe to us the problems you have faced in terms of reporting the story, and also the problems perhaps that your colleagues have faced, because we've seen over the last few months they've been targeted again and again and again?
على أي حال بالتأكيد هذا الأمر كان واحد من التحديات أصعب التحديات إن صح التعبير التي عشتها، أصعب التجارب في حياتي على الإطلاق. وبالتالي عندما يتعرض شخص مثلي صحفي كان يحلم ويؤمن أيضا إيمان يعني عميق جدا بأنه بإمكاني أن أسلط الضوء على قضية الإنسان وأن أقوم برسالة الصحافة على أكمل وجه.
Definitely, it was not only a very horrific and difficult experience, it was a difficult challenge at the same time for someone like me who considers himself a professional journalist and who is committed to conveying the message of what's been happening in Gaza.
لكن فجأة يجد نفسه في أتون هذه الآلام والمآسي الشخصية، تصله رسالة تحدي من الاحتلال الإسرائيلي، وكأنهم يعاقبوه على هذه الرسالة الإنسانية، على التزامه بالمهنية والموضوعية. هذا الأمر وصلني بالتأكيد، لكن وصلني مع الأسف بطريقة موجعة جدا، مفجعة جدا، مؤلمة جدا، ومكلفة أيضا. ولذلك كان علي أن أقرر ما الذي سأفعله.
It seems that the Israelis have sent me a message. It seems that they did not want me to do my job as a journalist, conveying to the world what's happening in Gaza. Unfortunately and painfully enough, the message was horrific. They did not just want to own me, but apparently they wanted to punish me through punishing my own family and my loved ones, maybe in an attempt to silence me and through me my colleague journalists in Gaza.
لا تتخيلوا كم هو صعب هذا القرار، هذا الموقف، هذه التجربة، عندما تفقد الزوجة والولد والابن والبنت والحفيد وأبناء الإخوة، الزملاء، المكتب، البيت، المنزل، الذكريات، التاريخ، الجغرافيا، كل هذه الأشياء عندما تفقدها ومطلوب منك ألا تشعر بها لمصلحة القضايا العامة، لمصلحة القضايا التي تعتقد بأنها تهمك كصحفي، تهم الأسرة، وتهم قضية الإنسان في غزة، وتهم الناس، ملايين الناس الذين لهم حق المعرفة.
It's really difficult for anyone to imagine what it means to lose your office, to lose your wife, your children, your grandson, your relatives, your neighbors, the office where you work, and many of your colleagues, and yet face this reality and decide for yourself what to do next. For me, I couldn't have betrayed all these people, all this blood which was shed. For the sake of me loving and respecting my profession, I felt I had to go on because somebody ultimately has to do this job and tell the world what's happening. This is a duty not on me. I didn't feel it's incumbent on me to do this, but for the sake of my own or my family, but for the sake of humanity at large.
وبالتأكيد كان لدي قرار بدون أدنى تردد. بالعكس، هذا التحدي أعطاني كثير من القوة والعزيمة والإرادة والتصميم للاستمرار، لكن هذا كان بدافع حبي لهذه المهنة وهذه الرسالة، إيماني العميق بأهميتها للإنسان وللإنسانية قاطبة، وأيضا وفاء لمن دفعوا حياتهم ثمنا لإيمانهم بدوري ورسالتي من الزوجة والأسرة والزملاء والجميع. ولذلك كان لزاما علي أن أكون وفيا بأقصى درجة، بأعلى درجات الوفاء لهم، لدمائهم، لتضحياتهم، وأيضا حتى يشعر الناس ما الذي نحياه نحن كصحفيين، ومن خلالنا ما الذي يحياه الإنسان في قطاع غزة والإنسانية في القطاع.
When I was faced with this dilemma and had to decide what to do, I felt that I could not betray the blood and the sacrifices of all these people. I could not betray my profession, which I loved and respected, and I deeply believe in. In the end, my choice, despite all these difficult times and the hardship, and the pain I had to endure was clear enough. I have to continue for the sake of not only myself and the profession, but for the sake of humanity. Somebody somewhere has to stand up and face this stark reality and tell the world what's happening. Be the witness for people and the voice for people who otherwise will have no voice to tell the world what they have to endure.
ولكم أن تتخيلوا اتخذت هذا القرار، لكن على خلفية هذا القرار كنت أفكر كيف سأبدو، كيف سأظهر، كيف سأعود أمام الشاشة. هل سأعود مهتزا، مرتبكا، ضعيفا؟ هل سأبدو مهنيا؟ وأنا بالتأكيد كنت أنظر إلى أن الأهمية القصوى بخلاف العودة هي أن أعود بكامل المهنية، الركوز، الموضوعية، وأيضا الحديث عن معاناة الناس وعدم الحديث عن معاناتي الشخصية. وهذا ألم وجهد ليس له حدود حقيقة.
Of course, I decided to continue, but I had to face another choice now. If I'm going to go back to do my job and face the world, how am I going to appear? I should appear in a way which does not reflect my personal pain and suffering. I should be a professional person trying to tell the story of others, a journalist doing his job. So despite all the pain and the suffering I had to endure and the deep emotions inside me, I had to put all of that aside and look cool, calm, and collected before the world and tell a story. At the same time, respect and live up to what's expected from me as a person and all my colleagues, the younger generation journalists, and the world at large, that I have to appear respecting the standards and what's expected of the journalists in Gaza when there was no one left but the local journalists in Gaza, when the international press was, of course, barred from being there in the first place.
Wael, there we will leave it. But thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, Wael Al-Dattu joining us from Doha. Now, let's join. We stay in the region, obviously, and over to Gaza. And we're going to just get a small message from Dr. Mohammed Abu Mughazib. He's MSF's Deputy Medical Coordinator in Gaza. Sent this update from Khan Yunis. We were hoping to get him live, but he did record a message just in case because of the time difference. And also at night time, you have to be aware that obviously electricity supply and connectivity just sometimes doesn't happen. So this is the backup, and he's very kindly sent us this message.
Over the past 23 months, life in Gaza has been a non-stop crisis. Even before this war, the health system was a weak, fragile system with short of staff, medicine, equipment, and that was related to the siege and closure. That was imposed on Gaza for the last 17 years. When the war started, it has almost collapsed. Today, only few hospitals and clinics are running on a daily basis with very limited resources. The human cost of this war is huge. More than 60,000 people have been killed. Nearly 146. At least 42,000 children are injured, many with lifelong disabilities. Nearly 19,000 children in Gaza are now living alone, and they are orphans. Women and elderly are also a large part of those who have been killed. The population of Gaza, which is almost 1.9 million, have been forced from their homes, forced evacuation, displacement, and about 90,000 of the houses of Gaza have been destroyed. In the last 24 hours, and this is every day, every hour, hospitals are full, beyond the limit. Patients are lying on the floor, in the corridors, Patients are not waiting in queues just for water and food, but here in Gaza, now in this war, patients and injured are waiting in queues to see a doctor in the ER, to be operated, or to have a free ICU bed. The needs are much bigger than the care we can provide. Many trauma wounds from heavy weapons, amputation, head injuries, burn. We see them on a daily basis in our facilities and hospitals that MSF is running. Severe burns and complex injuries that need specialized operating rooms, but very few are available now in the hospitals of Gaza. The big shortage of basic drugs such as painkillers, anesthesia drugs, antibiotics, surgical instruments. On the top of the trauma, we also face disease outbreaks, untreated chronic illnesses, and malnutrition recently. The suffering is not only in Gaza a physical suffering. The mental health and stress is huge. Children have lost parents, women have lost their husbands, families live in tents with no safety. Health workers are working non-stop while also carrying their own grief. This is not only a medical crisis. It's a human disaster. The numbers show it clearly. Tens of thousands killed, thousands of children orphaned, nearly 2 million displaced, and with a health system which barely standing. Still hospitals, health workers keep going possible with very little. But the needs are massive in Gaza now. Medical care, food, water, and most of all, protection for civilians.
Dr. Mohammed Abu Maghassib, who's MSF's Deputy Medical Coordinator, speaking to us there in a recorded message just sent a little while ago. Is it still? No. Still working? Can you hear me at the back there? There we go. Yeah, that was Dr. Mohammed Abu Maghassib, MSF's Deputy Medical Coordinator in Gaza. And we also want to thank Moafak Tafik for your translation as well. Thank you very much. Yara Eid is our guest right at the end there. Hello. An award-winning Palestinian journalist and human rights advocate who's been reporting from Palestine for several years, covered the 2022 assault on Gaza as a field reporter and continues to document the ongoing genocide. Good to have you with us this evening. What can you share about the realities of your experiences as a Palestinian and then as a journalist and then being a working journalist on the ground in the location that we're talking about this evening?
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be along people who believe in freedom and justice, and this is an honor, and we live in a world where unfortunately this is not very common these days. Thank you for being here, and I see a lot of the people here crying, hearing Wael's words, and you should be. You know, what's happening is appalling. I myself, as Yara, not as a journalist, I lost more than 90 members of my family. That's just from my dad's side. I lost my uncles, my cousins, my, the grandchildren of my uncles, everyone, basically, my aunts, their husbands, and this is not a Yara experience. This is not unique to me or to Wael, even though that every single Palestinian has a unique story. We do not want to confuse that, but what I'm trying to say is that every single Palestinian shares this common grief, common loss of homeland, of, memory, memories. What Wael was describing was, we're not just talking about people. We're not talking about 60,000 people. We're talking about 60,000 stories, 60,000 dreams, and this is what we have so far. I think the numbers will go as high as, Amnesty can speak on the numbers more than me right now, but we are talking not just about a tragedy or a catastrophe or a second, Holocaust. What's happening is beyond what happened in the Nakba in 1948. And as a journalist myself, I have a different experience from Wa'il's now because I wasn't in the genocide. I was lucky, I was privileged that I was in London when the genocide started, and I was working here for a global charity for education. But then a lot of us Palestinian journalists, I think a lot of our journeys start despite our dreams and our passions. I'm not saying that journalism is not my passion, but it definitely wasn't my first choice of a career. But I felt the need, the need to report, the need to have a voice in the West, to challenge Western media. Most of you now know me from the heated debate on Sky News. And this is what I do. I go and I challenge Western media. And this is a different reality that I have to deal with. Wa'il is there and my other colleagues who've been killed. We're talking about more than 270 journalists on the ground being killed. They are surviving one of the most horrific genocides, live-streamed genocide. They are not only reporting, they are the paramedic, they are the journalist, they are the father, they are the mother, they are the starved population themselves. They are the story. They're no longer reporting on a story, they are becoming the story. Like I lost my family, like I lost my mentor and colleague Rushdie Sarraj, who I trained with. And we all are connected in Gaza. Gaza is very small. We're talking about 365 kilometers squared. I was lucky enough to meet Wa'il in real life before the genocide, to learn from his expertise at Al Jazeera office in Gaza. This is Wa'il's scarf. This is solidarity. I wear it in pride. Honestly, I know it says
and
one
Wael smiles at the same time, knowing that you're wearing it.
Yeah, and he gave it to me, and this is the most valuable thing I own now, honestly, alongside my mother necklace of a Palestinian map. What I'm trying to say is we have different realities, but we share a lot of common suffering, a lot of common struggles. But what unites us as Palestinian journalists is our fight for justice and freedom. And I think my reality is very different because I am here trying to wake up and get denied my existence every single day and trying to prove that I have the right to exist just like anyone in this room or anyone in this world. And we are seeing that international journalists are not doing enough. International journalists are actually being complicit. And I call media outlets like BBC, Sky News, every Western journalist who has the ability to speak up, and we all know that they all do, but they're not speaking about Palestine. And I leave this with the audience because I tend to speak too much, but I urge you, why am I denied the right to be a human while Israelis, have the right to self-defense or just being a human, Why am I not a human enough? I don't understand. I actually look like you. Maybe I don't look, I don't look alien, I am a human at the end of the day. Wa'il is human. Wa'il is a father. He was not just a journalist. I'm just talking about Wa'il right now. I'm a big fan, guys, Yeah. But, he is not just a journalist. He's a father. He's a lecturer. He's a role model for many people. And I think he's inspired generations to come. A lot of Palestinian journalists become journalists because they're forced to. Rushdie Sarraj, when he started Ain Media, he's my mentor and I trained with him. He started it as a film production company. We wanted to make documentaries about love in Gaza, about our beaches. And in 2022, I was running in the streets with Rushdie, running from airstrike to airstrike, documenting dead babies. I was only 21, 22. And my cameraman was killed in this genocide. No one is still alive from Ain Media. They are either imprisoned, they're either murdered, or I survived because I was outside of Gaza. Ibrahim Lafi, that you know about, I talk about in every single place I go to. He's my best friend who was killed on October 7th just because he had a camera. And he was wearing a press vest, he was wearing a helmet, and all of them journalists, they were marked as press. Wa'il, when he got injured, and Samir Abu Daqqa was killed, they knew who they were. Come on, we're talking about one of the most advanced militaries in the world. They know where a fly is if they needed to. You know this, it's a nuclear army, so they know who they're targeting, and they lied about Shireen Abu Aqla, they lied about Wa'il al-Dahduh, they lied about Hamza al-Dahduh, Wa'il's son, they lied about Ibrahim Lafi, and they will continue lying. And you know what? We are not safe as long as Israel exists. Israel is a threat to humanity. The Israeli regime and the Israeli occupation forces are a threat to every single human being in this planet. And thank you.
Yara, thank you. I'll ask you just to pass the microphone to our next guest. Yara, obviously, you know, it's good to get your perspective as well along the fact that you've also experienced Gaza in a way that we can't imagine. Turning now to our next guest, who is MSF's project coordinator, Caroline Williman. She left Gaza just a few weeks ago and is here to tell us exactly what really Yara just touched on, the reality. We don't sometimes really understand, I don't think we ever can through a TV screen, what we see as a live reporter is as a witness to what's going on. It's so different to what we see on a 35-inch television screen. What is it like right now, just before you left?
Thank you, and thank you to Wael and Yara and Dr. Mugasaib. I'm always humbled to speak in your presence. I did return from Gaza just 2 weeks ago. It is exactly as you see on TV. It is exactly, I saw it in 3 dimensions and I got the sounds and the smells and everything, but no one can pretend that we don't know what is happening there because we have been watching it for 23 months now. I entered knowing that I would witness a genocide. I think on day 2 I was interviewed and I used the words apocalyptic and dystopian, and I think for me what was the most unbelievable part was the fact that in the 2 months I was there, things got worse every single day. We saw the peak of the hunger crisis in our malnutrition program. We had a 5-fold increase of patients between May and August. So these are children between 6 months and 5 years, as well as pregnant and lactating mothers. I saw my own colleagues hungry. I'm working 9 years with MSF. Never in my career have I sometimes we tend to forget that starvation isn't just the prerogative of the Palestinians. The actual healthcare workers, the charity groups, are also having the same issue of getting food into the region itself. I mean, you are and your colleagues face the same problem as starvation. We do face the same problem. I want to be very clear. I'm mainly talking about my Palestinian colleagues. So we are a team of 80 people, of which we're only 4 foreigners, as we do in every country where MSF works. But so indeed, when people ask me what is difficult about doing the work, it's that the work of my Palestinian colleagues is being made impossible. They were sometimes at work. They had not eaten 24 hours. They had not eaten 48 hours. They were working in 35 degrees. When they go home, many of them, they go home to a tent. They also stand in line with a jerry can to get some water at the end of the day. They face all the same issues that every single other Palestinian in Gaza does. When it comes also to the malnutrition, my medical colleagues would also always explain it has an impact not just on the lack of food, but also in terms of the healing of wounds. They're not healing the way they should because people don't have access to sufficient nutritious food the way they should. In the primary healthcare center we had around 450 consultations per day. When I arrived, we had more than 600 per day by the time I left. We had to send away up to 200 people every single day because simply we do not have the capacity.
Caroline, can I just ask, what sort of injuries are you seeing? It's not just starvation. Can you, dare I say, colour the picture for us?
Yeah. So we see a whole range of people needing to see a doctor. It's a primary healthcare center. It's one of the activities we have there. We see people who need to see a doctor the way you and me need to see a doctor, because it's not because you're in the middle of a genocide that you're not also getting sick. So we get, let's say, people with a flu, upper respiratory tract infections, but then we very much also see the direct results of living conditions, skin infections all over the place, gastrointestinal issues because people don't have access to clean water, and of course very many burns, very many broken bones, orthopedic injuries as well. A boy that will always stay with me is a 7-year-old Abdallah. He was in our short stay unit that we run next to our clinic. His body's 37% burnt because there was an airstrike on the school where he was living with his family. Both his parents and 4 of his siblings were killed in that airstrike, and I'm sorry for the graphic detail, but I think it's important that people really understand the remains of his family members were collected in a bucket by his uncle, And when his uncle spoke to our doctor, he asked, "Do you understand how precious is this boy?" And for me, this is really the question that I would like to ask the world. Does anybody understand how precious is Palestinian life? It's not what we see on the ground at all that anyone understands. I think one of the most horrendous things I saw as well was people being shot at while they looked for food. In the case where I was, so mainly the trucks of the World Food Programme that were crossing the border at Zikim, desperate people would go towards them and they would get shot. I spoke.
And you were based in the north
Yes.
of the Strip, though you also know what the situation is like in the south. Let's just talk about distribution. Can you comment anything? Can you comment on the Gaza Humanitarian Fund and the way that this pseudo-Israeli American organisation is distributing food? We have seen pictures of Palestinians being targeted. What's your experience of eyewitnesses, and what are they saying about whether they are getting food from this group or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to be very clear, because I was based in Gaza City, I did not see those patients myself, but of course I spoke extensively with my colleagues who do. They have collected data in 2 of the clinics where we saw patients coming in who were shot there. Over only 7 weeks, they had 1,380 patients who came from there. 28 of them were dead. And this is a daily reality. I know that we would say even in Gaza City, some days the centers of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation were closed, and we would look at each other and we would say, less people will die today. And it is insane that this is how you have to react to that. And I mean, the name in itself, there is nothing humanitarian about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
You talked about the fact that you have nearly 80 colleagues that work alongside you at MSF, you might be foreigners coming in and out. Is there a moment of guilt that you are leaving the Strip and what you're leaving behind? Because some of those images are seared into your memory. I doubt very much you're going to forget them in the near future.
Absolutely, but this is, of course, the reality that my colleagues have been facing for 23 months. By now, and of course at the time that I left already, the offensive on Gaza City had started. I would have colleagues, I would see them in the morning in the office, in the clinic, having shown up, telling me that at 11 in the evening the night before they had run out, they had grabbed their children and run out of their home barefoot because the bombing was so nearby. This is the reality that they are living. But also for me, whenever people tell me there is no humanity left in Gaza, I think that is absolutely untrue. I have never seen more humanity in my life than I have in the healthcare workers of Gaza, and that is the one thing that keeps some hope.
Caroline Williman there from MSF. Thank you very much, Caroline. We've choreographed this quite well. The microphone just moves along the rows. I bet you know who we're going to speak to next. That's Sasha Deshmukh. He's the UK Chief Executive for Amnesty International. Good to have you with us. MSF is using the term genocide. We're hearing it a lot more now from various charitable organisations. Amnesty International came up with this conclusion last December. In the face of this and sort of the deepening apartheid and genocide, as many are terming it, how essential is it to find sort of a human rights-based approach to get out of this carnage? Is it possible?
Well, first, thank you for having us here. And by the way, I can see quite a few people who are in tears and quite emotional. So I think for those of us speaking, anyone who needs a bit of space, we are not going to take offence if you have to leave the room for a moment. And I have a grey rucksack over there, and I carry tissues around now as common. Yeah, I gave you some earlier. So please, we're all human beings, and anyone who needs some help while we're speaking, please do. I just want to begin by again, I know there's quite a audience here of lots of people who are very engaged and very expert in different ways. But just so everyone is clear, neither genocide nor apartheid are adjectives, nor are they things applied subjectively. And actually, some of the critics who like to try to criticise the use of the terminology of either genocide or apartheid try to give the impression that these are just adjectives thrown out subjectively. They are legally defined concepts within the Genocide Convention, the Apartheid Convention, and then together in the Rome Statute, respectively. The reason I say that, And actually also I'll say one other thing, that sadly in recent history there have been other examples of genocide. For example, Amnesty reached these conclusions, others too, sadly in relation to the Rohingya population in Myanmar. I say none of that to diminish the seriousness of this, the opposite. We hear people who sometimes try to say that there are justifications for what we're seeing in terms of genocide. The core fundamental principle that's flown right the way through universal human rights, right the way since 1948, a fundamental principle of international law, law relating to the laws of war and war crimes, law relating to international humanitarian law, is that there can never be a military aim or a political aim that justifies these kind of crimes. It's an absolute fundamental. It's absolute fundamental for those countries that advocate that they strongly believe in that, including the United Kingdom, our Prime Minister. Some of the textbooks I studied in relation to international law and international human rights law were written by Keir Starmer. Fundamental point is that even if it is your ally, they do not somehow get an opt-out from the same standards that apply. We are currently sadly in a position whereby right around the world, whether it's in the audience of the media, whether it's in
recording in progress,
whether it's in political debate, or obviously then that flows through to public debate, where there are claims that somehow people are trying to hold parties in this situation to a different standard than they would otherwise, and that somehow that means that we are not seeing these crimes happening, or that somehow what we're seeing is would be tolerated somewhere else, but we're acting more firmly here. We are not. And I would argue strongly we are seeing the opposite. We're seeing the opposite. So just in relation to I will answer your question, but please, these are very, very, very important things, I think, for everyone here to understand. In relation to an answer about a way through, there has never been a sustainable peace built in any situation of conflict around the world that has not been built on a human rights-based solution. And every attempt that has been created to try and create an end to conflict based essentially on one force having a stronger oppressive position than another has either been only achieved by the total elimination of that particular population, either through killing or displacement, or usually a combination of the two, or through the total oppression that ultimately leads to an explosion in the situation. So is the only possibility of a route through a human rights-based solution? Absolutely it is. Do I hold out much hope? I think a really important thing for people to understand, rightly we're focused on the humanity in the situation right now. That is absolutely correct. The horrors, the deaths, the enforced starvation we are seeing right now. I can talk about apartheid in the West Bank and East Jerusalem because I was there recently too in another moment or in questions. Utterly horrific. There is a bigger point too that I want to make. I believe that when I started this role 5 years ago, we used to talk about how will we make the international frameworks and the UN fit for purpose for 2040. If you ask me to bet money now, I'm not a betting man particularly, but if you ask me to bet money now, I would actually bet money that they will be hollowed out institutions that are dead by 2030 or 2040. The reason being that the last vestiges of hope, of oxygen, that the period from the 1990s created, that we could have a principles-based legal international order led by countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, other European countries, but bringing people into those principles so that they became universal and global. The last bits of oxygen of that are being burnt to a cinder right now because we're showing ourselves so unwilling to hold our allies and ourselves to those kind of standards. Final thing I would say, if there is going to be a way through, the only examples recently, maybe even going back millennia, but certainly in the years that I've been working in these areas, where we've seen sustainable human rights-based solutions in conflict areas, I'd say one clear thing. They've had women leading women peace security-based solutions at the heart of them, and they've built far more sustainable solutions. And the areas where that hasn't happened, or indeed continued conflict, tend to have male-led leadership and drivers. So yes, it could only be a human rights-based solution. Honestly, I don't want to give anyone false hope. I worry more that this is going to lead to the final end of the world rules-based order, and it's solely about which powers do what with their allies and proxies, and that's what this is, the final kind of chapter leading us towards.
And you've talked about sort of the rules-based institutions that perhaps have failed the Palestinians right now, and certainly the way that national governments globally should be reacting to this if they have the principles in place and the agreements that they've signed up to over decades. So how important are organisations like the International Criminal Court, warrants, targeted sanctions, trade relations, arms exports, because you've got government saying one thing and you've got the populace in various countries coming out in their hundreds of thousands at the weekends, in the week, on the sea, on the land, telling their governments, firstly, we don't trust you, or secondly, you need to do more.
It's a great question. I think I would say this, wouldn't I? I think they're super important. But I'll say it in sort of slightly funny way. If a government does what I might consider to be the right thing, but it doesn't know why it's doing the right thing, I don't think that's as powerful as there being a principle and rule-based system by which even governments that might not politically want to do that feel governed. Ironically, what we have, let's think about where we're sitting right now. We have a government that, I should say Amnesty International is strictly, globally, non-party political. So the point I'm going to make is an observation. I would say that the strongest principle that was clearly stated when this current government in the UK was elected was that they said that they wanted the UK to restore its position as a leader on international law. Not sure you could properly anchor anything else other than maybe growth, as what they said they were for. It's other people's job to decide whether they delivered their second one of those things. But the behaviours around this area clearly show that we have even a government that stated that as its clear intention, I think, being half-hearted in its support of those institutions when it's key. Just to give you an example, earlier in the year, even though the government was not stating as clearly as it could, I think, support for the clear evidence that existed for for committing of genocide, its position was this is for international courts to decide, was broadly the top level of its position. Just a few days ago, we hear as almost his last act as Foreign Secretary, David Lammy appeared to write to the International Development Committee that the UK government has concluded that there isn't a genocide. On what basis it's made that conclusion? On what transparency of that? Based on the evidence that I've seen, I find that incredibly hard to think that it's got any robustness. But to your question, in a way, back to my point of principle, if they said, we think there's a genocide, but we don't know why, as an evidence-based person, I'd almost be saying, well, hang on, don't say that. Rely on and trust the institutions that are there to judge that. Of course, it's even worse when there is such compelling evidence, and obviously the ICJ hasn't just said it's looking at it, it's actually talked about the actions necessary because of the compelling nature of the evidence, even before final conclusions. But to undermine that, it's appalling.
Sasha Deshmukh there from Amnesty International, Chief Executive. We're sort of getting statements from everybody, and then of course we'll have those questions from you. I promise you we'll give you plenty of time to ask our panel the questions I think are formulating in your mind at the moment. Last but not least is MSF's UK Director, Dr. Natalie Roberts, who sits with me. Has been taking notes of everything that's been said so far. You're a veteran of many emergency scenarios around the world. You've been in ops outside of Gaza on this particular situation. How does this differ from all the other experiences that you've had globally?
Yeah, again, thanks for having me, and thanks to the panel. It's really humbling to speak after everybody else. I'll try and keep it relatively brief because I think you've heard a lot from my colleagues in particular. So, yes, it's true, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, we work in many places. We work in sort of more than 70 countries around the world, and we've worked in Palestine for decades, including in Gaza, and I've worked in really quite a lot of places, a lot of really, active war zones. I worked in Aleppo in 2012 and 2013. I worked in the north and the south of Yemen. I've worked in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we don't like to compare situations. You know, it's not. We don't want to diminish people's suffering in any one of those places. You know, people are in crisis. They're in crisis, and they're experiencing that crisis. But truly, Gaza is exceptional. It really is exceptional, and I'm not the only person in MSF who's saying that. And, you know, my colleagues here have described it, you know, Caroline and Mohammed on the screen, and I've been talking to Mohammed, you know, quite frequently during the last 23 months, and it's really quite shocking to see how thin he's getting. But yes, they described it here in a detail better than I ever could. That mass deliberate harm of civilians, the mass forced displacement, the nowhere to go. It's not just that people are forced to leave their homes. Where are they supposed to go? I mean, they're all having to leave Gaza City today, and they're being sent to Al-Mawasi, which is this tent camp in the south, and they're being told that's where you need to go to be safe, and then immediately children in Al-Mawasi are bombed collecting water. So, you know, being forced to leave your home and then being told to go somewhere that you know is not safe, you know, systematic forced displacement of people who cannot flee to safety. There's the destruction of all the infrastructure which supports the conditions of life. So it's not just that they're targeting hospitals, they're targeting water points, they're targeting aid points, they're targeting everything that you need to survive, essentially, as well as targeting your civilians. And there's the siege and the starvation that's been so well described, and the weaponization of the food aid. You know, Caroline talked about these GHF sites. It's astounding. We've very rarely seen anything like that, where you say, this is the only place you can come and get food, and when you come and get food, we'll shoot at you. I mean, we haven't seen that. I've never seen that in my career, and I think very few of my colleagues, even the people who've worked for MSF for 50 years, and I know people who've worked for MSF for nearly 50 years, they've never seen that. And so, yes, I have experienced elements of all of these in different places at different times. You know, in Syria, I didn't think I'd see anything worse than what I saw in Syria, but this is different.
Caroline, can I just interrupt? What shocks you more about this, though, than you might say the displacement in Aleppo or Ebola in the Congo? I mean, there's something that resonates. Like Caroline was saying, there are sometimes an instance or an image or an experience that resonates with you.
I think it's all of it added up. It's not one single element. It's the fact that you've got all these elements together. It's systematic, and it's ongoing, and it's at a scale that we just haven't seen, really, because Gaza is tiny.
Is it a scale that, for example, the British public just haven't got a grip of, really don't understand?
I think they struggle to get a grip of, because numbers don't really tell the story, because numbers can tell a story. You know, some people like to say, well, what about Sudan? You know, there are millions of people suffering in Sudan, and there's famine in Sudan as well. The point is that Gaza is tiny. You know, it's a population of 2 million, and every single person is suffering through this. It's not like if you get lucky, you might be spared. We're seeing all the elements of essentially deliberate destruction of people, and that's why we've called it a genocide, because we're witnessing something that is quite extraordinary, I think.
When you talk about the populace at large, you also focus on your own members of staff and people that you care about that are obviously helping to deliver that aid, and there's one particular person that you want to focus on, I know, who's been in incarceration for nearly 8 months now, and is a vital member of the MSF team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have about 1,000 Palestinian colleagues working for us in Gaza at the moment. 12 of our colleagues have been killed, again, with complete impunity, and that's the other thing here, that we're seeing complete impunity. For those 12 colleagues who've been killed, it was different moments, different times over the 23 months. It wasn't like, you know, an MSF hospital was bombed in Kunduz in Afghanistan and 14 colleagues were killed.
It's easy to...
And killed in one go, but 12 people killed over that
easy to hide
period.
under the radar.
Exactly. We've never received any acknowledgement of their lives or their deaths or their even their existence. In comparison to if our colleagues were killed anywhere else, we'd at least have some kind of engagement on that, some kind of explanation. We might not believe the explanation, but at least we'd have some kind of engagement, and this is complete impunity. And yes, we have our colleague, Dr. Mohammed Obeid. So he was one of the doctors working in Kamal Adwan Hospital. So he was arrested along with 57 others back in October, I think. I can't remember the exact date, but they were rounded up in a Kamal Adwan hospital. He's been taken to detention in Israel. We do not have direct contact with him. He is not in contact with his family. We know that he's lost an awful lot of weight. And that's as much information as we can get. And for a long time, we couldn't even get confirmation that he was in detention in Israel and where he was. And so he's one of our colleagues that we say, well, how is that acceptable? There have been no charges issued against him, but he's been imprisoned anyway. And you know, that's, for us, that's one of the exceptional things. We don't see that normally. We are an organisation that does have a certain reputation that normally we can discuss with people and try and understand a bit more clearly, you know, what the accusations would be against Mohammed Obeid. We can't get any engagement.
I know that there's just one more question that I've just come to mind, really, is that, you know, you're the chief executive here at MSF. You speak to a lot of other organisations, other charitable groups. What's the general consensus in the charitable group sphere over the past 23 months? I mean, you don't work in isolation. You do consult other groups.
And there have been a lot of conversations, and I think, you know, there was a lot of caution at different times. We always worry a little bit because we don't want to compromise. You know, I'm secure here in the UK now. I'm not working in Gaza. And so we don't want to compromise our colleagues' safety. We don't want to say something we think will make the situation worse. And I think there's been quite a lot of fear amongst, you know, aid organisations in particular based in the UK about maybe using the wrong words, about maybe offending people, about maybe kind of undermining our argument of, or, you know, our description of the situation. We have colleagues, you know, who, you know, like Caroline, who gets interviewed on the news, or Dr. Mohammed, who's been interviewed regularly, and at times we've received immediate kind of reaction from Israeli authorities saying, no, they're lying, it's not true, you know, and undermining their stories. I think that has kind of created a bit of a, you know, a fear amongst other organisations. I know that I know Amnesty, clearly they're a human rights organisation, they have maybe a bit more legitimacy in some people's eyes to call it a genocide. MSF is a humanitarian organisation. We were a little bit, you know, afraid that when we came out and called it a genocide, and we couldn't really call it anything else based on our experience, but we were a bit afraid that immediately people turn around and say, well, you can't call it a genocide, you can't judge. You know, you've got the UK government saying only the courts can judge. And so we were a bit worried that we would be sort of undermined and everything else we've been saying would be undermined. But actually, overwhelmingly, the support has been positive. And what we saw in our colleagues in other organisations who maybe hadn't wanted to use that word yet was they went, oh, okay, actually, if we all do it together, then we act in solidarity with each other as well, and we speak with a stronger voice when we speak together.
Thank you. Natalie Roberts, MSF. Now, we're going to open it up to the audience. That's you guys. You get the chance now to formulate your questions, think about what you want to ask. But we do have a little selection from the British media as well. And do we have Zaina Khan here? Hi, Zaina. How are you? Zaina's from the British Medical Journal. You have a question for the panel. Would you just like to point out who you want to ask the question to?
Hi, I'm Zaina. I'm a medical student, but I'm working as a journalist today. I think anyone who thinks they can answer the question. Sorry. Do you think the British medical leaders and establishments, such as the Royal Medical Colleges and the BMA and British journalists, have been vocal enough about the attacks on their colleagues in Gaza? And if not, what more would you like to see happen?
Natalie, I think you should answer that.
Yeah, I think I should probably start with that one. It's interesting. I've been in contact actually quite recently with a lot of the Royal Colleges and the sort of professional medical bodies in the UK, primarily around the subject of medivacs, because the UK government has said we will medivac some children. Unclear how many, and unclear around the conditions from Gaza. And so I reached out to you know, the different professional bodies, some of which I'm a member of, and asked them if they would sign on to a letter essentially asking the government to agree to certain conditions. We don't want just children arriving without their families. We don't want families to be separated. We don't want children to be arriving and be told after 6 months, no, you have to leave now. We want people to have the right to stay or the right to return. You know, various really basic conditions. We wanted this to happen at speed and at scale. And so we formulated a letter, and it was interesting because a lot of people were quite happy to sign on to the conditions that we were requesting, and we felt it was important for them to say, as professional medical bodies, we want to accept these children into the UK. Where we found more problems was them agreeing with our description of the situation, the rationale for why we felt that this needed to happen at speed and at scale. And I think some of the professional medical bodies, they still feel very nervous about, we didn't use the word genocide in that letter, but we did, talk about the situation in Gaza in languages that sometimes they weren't so comfortable with, and for maybe just reasons. They're professional medical bodies, they're not human rights organizations, they're not humanitarian organizations. So I think some of them are a little bit, unclear about how they can use their voice. They were extremely supportive of what we were trying to do, but they were also a little bit tentative about how to use their voice. I don't really want to judge them for that, though, because, that isn't their role necessarily. And so I don't want to judge people and say, well, everyone has to use their platform and everyone has to describe it with these words. So I can see that their members, some of their members will be unhappy with what they said, and some of their members will be very happy that they're not saying things as strongly as others. And it's difficult to keep a membership happy. So I'm not going to judge them for that, but I know that some of them would be more tentative than others about, talking about Gaza.
I hope that's answered. Oh, yeah.
I'm obviously not in the medical industry, but I've worked closely with many doctors as a journalist. We go to hospitals and we work in hospitals as journalists quite often because a lot of the tragedies happen, at hospitals. I think I agree with what you were saying, but I think everyone has a responsibility, especially people that uphold or they are humanitarian workers, initially doctors, people who are there to serve the public. They take an oath to, treat all people equally, etc. I think it is a responsibility for every single profession to call what's happening a genocide. And I say genocide because what is happening is nothing short of a genocide. And I know that in a lot of the panel discussions, you can come out of the panel feeling heavy and depressed because of the news that we've been sharing and talking about. But there is hope, and I'm going to talk about how they can actually change this narrative. I'm going to give an example of the 40...
If we can do it quickly, I want to get to the public to ask the questions.
Do you know the 40 students from Gaza who got scholarships to come to the UK, but they're not able to be evacuated because the UK refused to give them the biometric, to waive the biometric part thing. Now the UK is trying to evacuate them, and this is because of social pressures of journalists, activists, advocates. And that's why I think every single profession has a way to help in this genocide, to prevent the famine, the forced famine, if we manage to change the life of 40 Palestinian students, I can guarantee that together in this world, enough humans can end this genocide. I hope that makes it clear.
Thank you. David Gritton from the BBC, are you here? David Gritton? Where are you, sir? Speak up, sir. Did you have a question, sir? No, I've got your name down here. Don't worry about it. Ihtisham, I know you very well from Al Jazeera.
Thank you. Hi. I just have a very mundane question, but I think it has much more to answer from you all. Why this indifference? When I say that, just build up to Iraq war, it was the corridors of power which drummed up the war drums were coming, but the world of journalism, our colleagues, amplified it. The rhetorics, the language used had profound impact in terms of mobilizing people's conscience and to say Saddam need to be taken off. The similar after 9/11, going into Afghanistan, similar rhetoric came from the newsrooms across the world, primarily Western world, unfortunately. Why that is lacking when it comes to Gaza today? Why that passive nature, the journalist acting that way?
Sasha, can I just bring you in on that? Because I think you have a better steer.
I suppose there's a couple of things to say in this. First off, I suppose I want to just say something specifically around the targeting of journalists in this conflict, which I know is not, your question sort of primarily about journalists based within the West, etc. I'll come to that. But this is not the only conflict or human rights violation situation in the world, far from it, where we're seeing an increased targeting of journalism. It's always been a pattern, of course it has, always been a pattern for people who want to, for autocrats, governments, etc., who want to oppress. Of course it has. We've seen an acceleration of that around the world. I think we've seen an utterly acute version of that situation here, obviously then manifested through the absolute removal of access of journalists, etc., and the direct targeting of journalists, of which there's such evidence, and including the use of techniques such as double tap attacks, where journalists and healthcare workers actually are part of the second wave who are hit because they go to the site of the first wave. It's all appalling. To your question,
it's about the apathy, isn't it? It's the apathy.
Obviously, look, my expertise is the human rights situation, whether something is or isn't right by human rights law, etc. So this is my observation, I suppose, rather than necessarily an amnesty position. I think that we can't just say journalists without talking about editors and owners. And I'm not sure it's fair to say, obviously there are journalists who have different perspectives. There are journalists, particularly those who write more in the opinion pieces, some of whom in this particular case I think are very strong advocates of the position taken by the Israeli government, others of whom very, very strong advocates of positions perhaps closer to our analysis, etc. But I think by and large there are a lot of people who I think, and this perhaps overlaps with some of the points made about whether it's royal colleges or other charities, some of the proponents of the point of view being expressed by the Israeli government, who are based here in the UK, are highly professional and highly litigious. And so I think perhaps in this conflict, you have a number of organisations, whether they're charities, professional bodies, or media outlets, who have put commenting on an evidence basis in this conflict at the ultra risky end in terms of where they see the legal risk to them as an organisation. That's not, I hasten to say, an amnesty analysis, because it's not our role to make that analysis to why the media does or doesn't do something. But it is my observation, and I say that partly because I am aware of the nature of that highly litigious, highly professional, highly focused attempt to counter a use of evidence-based and a neutral analysis in commenting on this particular conflict from all sorts of bodies, including the media.
Just Natalie, please.
One very small thing to that, which is, I think we've probably, I presume Amnesty have experienced it, we have experienced it, or indirectly through people you work with, that litigious nature of certain groups. And it's not that it's scary, it's that it's a huge hassle almost in many ways, someone complaining, and they complain. And I know I spoke to many journalists who say, I'd love to be able to say what I think, but I'm not allowed to because of editorial reasons. I've been told I have to present a neutral position, which means presenting the one side and then trying to then present the other side at the same time, even if I recognise that they don't,
There's no balance
there is no balance in there. And often that is because the litigious groups will come in on a attack against, a complaint about their perceived lack of neutrality in a situation, and I think that's something that we do need to call out.
Okay, just hang on to the microphone for a moment. I want to get through some more people. Yeah, if I can. Lizzie Durden from the New York Times. Is she here?
I don't know.
You don't have a question? I've got. It's nice.
I do have entire blogs about me and I write about
Sanjana Vagasi from New York Times as well. No. Okay, I'm going to throw this out then to the public because obviously nobody else wants to. I've had a question from you at the back there. Let's just start with the lady at the back. Please, we'll just get a microphone to you. The glasses fall off.
Thank you.
Just tell us where you're from, and if you don't mind, and who your question is geared to.
I'm Kirsty Sutherland. I'm a barrister. I specialise in IHL and ICL.
Bit louder when you speak.
I am the world's most softly spoken barrister.
That's
true.
okay. Just need to hold the microphone just slightly closer to your mouth. Don't worry. Thank you.
I guess this is to the doctors on the panel and to Sash. The ICJ, in its comments to South Africa, have confirmed that the duty to prevent is an ergonomous obligation. Now, duty to prevent means that all states have to be watching before a genocide happens for the signs that a genocide is coming and act at that point. And we've seen that that has not happened at all. But that brings me to the kind of obsession of lawyers, which is evidence. And I'd be very interested to hear what the relationship between organisations such as MSF and governments is in providing evidence, because if you're swamping governments with evidence openly, then they can't really deny that there's a risk.
How much can you swamp a government with evidence?
Please swamp them, and if you need help, I'll help.
To Sasha, because, I can speak on behalf of MSF UK, but I know that my colleagues in other MSF offices around the world are also swamping their governments to some extent. I mean, I think we've been not just doing it as a standalone thing. I think there has been a lot of collaboration between different organisations. MSF is not the only organisation on the ground. We collaborate together, and we collaborate with organisations like Amnesty or Air Wars or some of the others to basically just compile this evidence, these lists. And one of the things that we did was we created an interactive tool which listed every event that we'd witnessed or experienced, of harm against civilians or of obstruction of aid or anything else that we felt, met the definition of war crimes and crimes against humanity, into one interactive tool that kind of listed over, I think it was nearly sort of 20 months worth of evidence. It stopped in the February just before there was the ceasefire. And so I've now written 7 open letters to the UK government, and each time I reference these new reports, these new evidence. We released a report that Caroline talked about with the killings at the GHF sites. So it documented in detail our medical data, which showed what was happening. And again, as soon as we get those reports, we send them to our government, and I write a letter to our government, and I ask to meet our government. And I've never really received any form of acknowledgement from our government that they've examined the content of what we're sending them.
Natalie, who are you writing to specifically?
So the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister. I mean, obviously there was a change of government in the meantime, but I write to the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister. Occasionally we receive a sort of letter of acknowledgement from a more junior minister that just said thank you very much. At the beginning it would say Israel has the right to defend itself. Increasingly it says we recognise the need for a ceasefire and more aid to get in, but it still doesn't acknowledge really the content of what want to talk to them about. So,
Sasha, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, please. So it's a great question, thank you. And putting it in sort of super simple terms, the principle that the ICJ is enforcing is when there is such compelling evidence, the world doesn't want to be in a position where all it's able to do legally is to say afterwards how appalling something that happened was. Everyone has a duty based on that evidence to take actions to stop even before some conclusion that's been reached, and that's exactly where we are now in terms of what the court's done. Let's just say this absolutely clearly. There is absolutely no way on earth that there can be a claim that the UK government doesn't have the evidence, okay? Not only because of Natalie's letters, other letters of people such as Natalie and organisations that are at the front line of different forms of delivery, but also because of what's directly communicated by organisations such as Amnesty International with significant amounts of evidence. Just to use one example, in August, when we reached a conclusion about the deliberate use of starvation as a tactic, again, I sort of apologise to everyone here who might think sometimes I talk in this kind of very legal way. It's not in any way to diminish the fact that lots of people are going, well, obviously it's being used, but it's my role to provide that in that evidential way. There's absolutely no issue that they could possibly claim that they don't know that, right? Why this policy area is being judged to a different standard by the UK government than it applies in some other geographies is, again, this is some way beyond my station and my job, but I'll give my own personal analysis. It's linked with political aims. It's linked with a relationship with the United States, no doubt. It's linked with a perceived sense of what one can do with an ally. My argument would be, at what point does urging an ally become such empty words that actually you're at risk of complicity with that ally's actions? In some ways, you could argue if you've got an alliance, you're even closer to that. The key point, I think, is that not only is the UK failing in its duties as a country in the way that you've talked about right now, in multiple ways, I believe that there is at least a risk, and again, I'm saying that carefully for legal terms, it's not my job or role that I can make this judgment, but I genuinely believe that there is at least a risk that specific individuals at the top of the UK government, ministerial level, are potentially complicit themselves as individuals, given their levels of knowledge and given their responsibility. Now, that may be in the future for an ICC, etc., to judge. Only thing I would say to those individuals, if they somehow don't feel politically able to take the step now, I can tell you that when it's 15 years' time and the ICC does start to chase and there's a different government in power and you're yesterday's person, there ain't anyone going to defend you at that particular point. That shouldn't be the reason to do the right thing. Of course it shouldn't. But honestly, are we potentially in that situation? The only thing I would say is I fear because of what's happening at the moment, that those key institutions are going to crumble because we're going to end up in an autocrat's world because we've shown that we will not act to the standard of principles that we avowedly said that we should. And so why on earth should anyone in the world believe in those? And those institutions will crumble.
Hold on to the microphone. I hope that answers your question. Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you. Perman Mustafa. I've got a question. He said, I'm shifting my eyes a little bit from Gaza towards the West Bank, given that the Israeli government has said that it does not believe in a two-state solution recently. Two things. One is, what are your observations, if you have any, of what had happened or has been going on in the West Bank over the years, from the daily micro justices that have happened for years and reached a crescendo after October 7th? And the second question is to the gentleman from Amnesty International. By all accounts, given the behavior of the permanent members of the Security Council in upholding the international, or not upholding the international law, and hollowing out the system of rules-based order that they talk about, when and if the assault on West Bank begins to happen, what can we now do as citizens to make our position felt?
Okay, just before we do that, can I get the mic over to the front? Because I've got a young man here that will ask the next question. Sasha, yes, please.
Thank you for raising this, and actually, obviously, not only does Amnesty do considerable amounts of work as an organisation in relation to the West Bank, and has for many, 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 many years. I was in the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem just earlier over the summer, so some of the observations I might make will be personal. But starting just with your second point, the only thing I would challenge in what you've said is that the assault on the West Bank began long ago. We have judged the situation in the occupied West Bank, occupied East Jerusalem, and indeed actually facing Israeli citizens of Palestinian origin within the state of Israel too. But let's focus on the occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank. We have judged that situation as, in multiple ways, clearly passing the evidential thresholds of contraventions of the Apartheid Convention. Again, just a reminder, apartheid, not just an adjective of a South African set of policies then defined in the convention as a result of learning the lessons of that, and very clearly defined. And we believe that evidential basis clearly passed, and we're obviously not alone in that. And other people, many years before, the late President Jimmy Carter was about a decade ahead of us in his analysis, so, and many others. The reason I say that the assault's begun long ago is when I was there at the end of May, beginning of June, being honest, I went there thinking I will just go and see as much as I already knew, because I work on this, obviously, a disproportionate amount to lots of people. Even within a very short period, not only was it significantly worse than I had expected, but I actually saw something accelerating at such a pace. And that was obviously even before, that was when people were debating what the Israeli government may or may not do on E1, or even debating whether Israeli civil society organisations that were trying to say these policies are wrong would be shut down and would be threatened. So the complicity, there's obviously different forms of complicity that I believe are happening on a governmental, on a national level with different situations by kind of ignoring the actions necessary, as we were just talking about in that question. Just to give you one specific example, though, in relation to the West Bank and the UK, UK trade systems, custom systems, etc., everything's perfectly set up to be able to allow a proper differentiation of goods between goods from settlement areas and the rest of Israel. Or frankly, if the issue is that at the Israeli end they're being so completely muddled, then a policy could be made as to say, I'm afraid that that's then creating too much of an avenue of goods from illegal sources where we're financially supporting that illegal action. Not happening here. I don't believe that that would be the approach in a different area. I think, being honest, what I saw, what I heard, the people who most clearly vocalised this when I was there a few months ago were Israeli political experts, Israeli human rights experts, who said absolutely clearly what is happening is an accelerated attempt to change the de facto situation to such an extent that the de jure situation is irrelevant, because it's an attempt to do that in such an accelerated way that the entire world essentially shrugs its shoulders and goes, well, the only way to have a peace is essentially to hand over an entire territory and have a few Bantustans of Palestinian population left within it. Now, whether that analysis is a true or correct view of the political view, in a way, again, slightly above my station, although not incredible, is that the result that I think we are in not just massive danger, likelihood, frankly, of seeing? I think it is.
Very quickly.
To his point, I think the West Bank, as Sasha said, it's already started, but many years ago. But you need to understand that the West Bank and Gaza are really different and really similar. Gaza has never had, well, in my time, any military presence on the ground. The West Bank is completely, checkpoints, freedom of movement, apartheid. Israelis and Palestinians can encounter each other, while in Gaza there are no settlements. There are no settler violence. There are no home raids or home demolitions unless it's like the bombs dropping on Gaza. Gaza looks like, kind of like an AI video game where Israel is just, using remote control and not, till this genocide started. But since I was born, this wasn't the case. The thing is, you asked what can we do as citizens to, eliminate the suffering of Palestinians or any people around the world. I think this relates to many points, questions that have been asked, and it's about centering Palestinian voices at the plight of what's happening. Platforming Palestinian journalists, Palestinian medics, Palestinian charities, and this happens. A genocide gets justified, and Palestinians get to dehumanize because of structural systems that have been in place for hundreds of years. Ihtisam's question, I think, can be answered why it's not the same in Gaza. Why the world is still allowing this to happen is because of the dehumanization of Palestinians that's been used years and years of different political actors, different countries, the Western world having this idea of Orientalism. Edward Said wrote about this in depth, but also, we have a problem in knowledge production, biased knowledge production, because I studied in the UK. I know this system. A lot of Palestinian authors are not being, part of university curriculum or college curriculum, while we have great thinkers. We have Palestinian testimonies from the ground, but what we have is actually Western people, white people, talking about Palestine as if they've lived there, with what's happening about, for example, what happened yesterday, Charlie Kirk shooting. Horrific. No one should be killed on the basis of their belief system. But the exposure that he got is more, some can argue that the exposure Charlie Kirk murder got is way more than the genocide will ever get, in the Western world. That's why Al Jazeera is doing the work of the BBC and Sky News. They're not doing enough. Western media is not doing enough. And that's why we need to platform Palestinian journalists, Palestinian people, and media monopoly. We have few media companies that is controlling the whole narrative and being paid hundreds and thousands of billions, even billions of dollars, to advance a certain rhetoric, the Israeli rhetoric. And Palestinian narrative is a part of our struggle. You need to hear, survivors' testimonies. You need to hear Palestinian stories of, a kid who's 7 years old will tell you what it feels to be having 37% of the body, burned. That is a testimony, and I'm not in any way diminishing the work that my colleagues do. But, we need to hear from survivors. We need to hear from Palestinians. And we need the knowledge production system, whether media, whether in universities or in books, on whatever, even educating our children. We need to hear from survivors. And this is not just specific to Palestine, but to
I'm just going to interrupt you there.
The lack of representation, just representation of Palestinians.
If I could have the microphone this end, because the second part of that question, Nancy, I hope you might be able to answer it, from the gentleman, was about the Security Council and the UN and the sort of order-based scenario that we expect to lay the ground rules, to make the statements for national governments to be wary of. And as Sasha, has talked about, not in his official capacity as Amnesty International, but in a personal capacity, is there a danger in your personal belief system that these order-based organisations are really teetering on the edge of really insignificance?
Yeah, absolutely, and I fully agree with what Sasha had to say about that. I mean, the Security Council, as it is, even the construct of the permanent members being who they are, you see who the permanent members of the Security Council are, they are never going to agree with each other. They decided they don't agree with each other, so there is therefore paralysis at the Security Council, because the entire mechanism is that one person can veto, one state can veto. And so, at the moment we have a situation where the US will just veto anything that comes at the Security Council. It's utter paralysis. It's just not going to move forwards on this. And I think Gaza is it's the canary in the coal mine, really, for, this is the worst type of situation we'll ever see. And the West Bank, true as well, it's kind of been more hidden, and it's been more almost neglected because Gaza is so horrific that people are kind of, the attention has been a bit lost on the West Bank, but they're not able to have a mature conversation at the UN Security Council level. And if they can't have a mature conversation at that level and agree to compromise and agree to move things forwards, then it's absolutely impossible for anything to move forwards, really.
I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I've got a medical question, I know. So, Caroline, I'm going to ask you to take this one, because I think you're a doctor, aren't you, sir?
Yeah, so my name is Mohammed. I'm a resident doctor based here in London. So, this question is mainly for the MSF team. Over the past 2 years, we've seen some horrifying images come out of the hospitals in Gaza. Now, most of these have been of injuries and major trauma, and you've touched on this slightly already, but what other medical crisis or disease epidemics are we seeing that aren't getting the attention that they should be getting in the media and online, outside of what's happening with the airstrikes and the indiscriminate bombing?
I can start, but just to be very clear, I am not a doctor, but I can speak to.
But you've been speaking to colleagues about the types of things they're seeing, Caroline.
I spend a lot of my time with doctors. I think one of the key things is which maybe doesn't really answer your question, but I think is key, is the destruction of the health system. So for everything for which people, what I was saying before, anything that you and me might need a doctor who are not living in a war zone, it's extremely difficult to get access to them. I was in touch like 2 hours ago with the medical director of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. He reminded me that right now, so they used to have 700 beds, they now have 250, and they have 640 patients for those 250 beds. They're dealing with up to 7 mass casualty incidents every single day, and with 500 to 600 patients in the ER department every single day. So these are indeed mainly the injured, but indeed, and this is also what a lot of the discussion of the medical evacuations is about, people still have cancer, people still have other very serious diseases for which they can no longer get treatment, and it's even something that would be questions that I get on a very regular basis from my own colleagues. You know, I would like to get my brother out of here, I would like to get my son out of here, because simply they can no longer get the treatment that they should be getting. Purely on the level of the primary healthcare, which is really what I was seeing most. In many ways, it reminded me a lot of what I've seen in the refugee camp Moria in Lesbos, where I repeated the same thing over and over again. What we see is a result of the living conditions that people live in. So gastrointestinal issues because there's no clean water, skin infections because there's no clean water, respiratory tract infections because everything is dust in Gaza City. And so this is really, at the primary level. I don't know, Natalie, if you want to add.
I can complete a little bit. It's a real shame that we couldn't have Dr. Mohammed connect live, because he could have explained better than I could. But, I mean, Caroline has explained you've got the normal ill health that happens in any population anywhere, but because it's not being treated, it escalates. And so someone who's got maybe a very treatable cancer will end up in an untreatable form of cancer or any other disease like that. Then you've got the diseases that are linked to the conditions of life, so the skin diseases, the respiratory tract infections, the diarrheas, the burns, actually, because a lot of the burns aren't just from the airstrikes. They're from the fact that people are using kind of fuel, they're living in tents, and so the tents catch fire. And so you have a lot of burns that are somewhat accidental, but they're not accidental, they're due to the conditions of life. Then you have the categories of disease that would normally be preventable. So, of course, there's been no vaccination in Gaza for now 2 years. So we're starting to see outbreaks of infectious disease that would normally be preventable by vaccination, but they are now starting to break out in Gaza. And there's a high risk at any point of, a huge epidemic of something like cholera or diphtheria. We've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Iraq, we'll see it in Gaza. And then on top of that, you have the injuries and illnesses that are directly related to the conflict, so the burns and the injuries, but not just. There are other illnesses related to conflict, a lot of mental health disorder, a lot of people under extreme psychological stress, and that is not just, they're a little bit stressed and we'll take them out of Gaza, it'll be fine. They'll be living with that trauma for decades to come. And then you have the basics, women's health. What are we doing about women's health? It's not just about giving birth, it's about what are we doing about getting contraception to women? What are we doing about people with complicated pregnancies? What are we doing about neonatal care? What are we doing about antenatal care? What are we doing about potential of sexual violence, which does happen in any place where you have, a lot of people crowded together in an environment with a lack of protection? We're going to be seeing that. And so basically everything you would expect to see when society breaks down is what we're seeing.
Natalie, hold on to the microphone. Do you want to say something else, Caroline? No, carry on, please.
Sorry, just one other thing I wanted to mention is also, we've spoken about the malnutrition, but I think a key point as well is, of course, as MSF, we see malnutrition in many places. Malnutrition did not exist in Gaza before 2023. So this is a key thing as well, like the numbers are even more astounding than they sound, because it was zero. We are not talking about the Sahel where there is a hunger period every year. And one thing, an image that really sticks in my mind as well, when you drive between Deir el-Bala and Gaza City, when speaking about how also this will continue in the future, you drive through completely dystopian dark clouds. And when I ask people what is this, people are burning tires and plastic, etc., in an attempt to make fuel, homemade fuel. I don't even know how this works, but the young men who are working there, I cannot imagine, you will know better than me, what kind of horrendous lung diseases they will be suffering from.
I need to get to the last question just very quickly, Ara, please, to Sasha.
1 second.
Very
sorry.
quickly.
But you need to understand that the health system before the genocide was already collapsing because of the blockade, because of the lack of access to things. So when my dad was hospitalized, I couldn't find him a bed, and he had a stroke in Al-Shifa hospital, the biggest hospital in Gaza. So imagine the amount of injuries that we're getting now in the genocide is just beyond comprehension.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you too much, but we need to get on. It's the final question, actually, it's for Sasha and for Natalie, because I think it affects all of us, because we are now heading towards the UN General Assembly in just a couple of days' time. So I ask both of you as from your own respective organisations, what do you expect to be heard? Who is going to say the things that really matter? And if we don't hear the things that really matter, is that just really the writing on the wall for us to understand that this conflict might just go on a lot longer than any of us really want to see? Considering also the Palestinian politicians haven't been given visas to express their case at the UN General Assembly.
So, I mean, this conflict's gone on 70 years longer than anyone wanted to see, and obviously it's intensively happened for 2 years longer than anyone could possibly have feared. And I can't see it ending, because I can't see that. I can't see it, again, the point I'm making is one beyond a sort of observation of the boundaries of international humanitarian law or war crimes or genocide. Like, there's never a military justification for those at all. But I can't comprehend the stated military aims and anything that equates to the end of those stated military aims being complete. So, in terms of the UN and the UN General Assembly, I mean, I'm going to the UN I'm going to New York on Sunday. I'll be there next week. You're right. There'll be no Palestinian voices there. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of things said at the UN General Assembly, and then, as Natalie rightly pointed out, there will be a paralysis of their structures, which isn't of course that's not entirely new through the UN's history, but that's definitely the case now, and it will be the case. Who are
the voices we should be listening to then?
Who are the voices, sorry?
That will be at the, there's state leaders, kings and queens, presidents, prime ministers, all speaking on behalf of their country. Whose voices should we be listening to?
You'll have a number of prime ministers, or presidents, or whatever from different countries who will talk about some of the evidence that we've been talking about, and you'll have some who will sort of present essentially in many cases falsehoods of alternate points of view, and you'll have some who sort of and ah between the two things. That is what the debate, etc., is going to be like. I don't think UNGA is going to make any difference to what's happening, being honest. Nor, frankly, necessarily will certain actions that might be taken simultaneously to it, in and of themselves, make a difference. People talk about statehood recognition. Again, we don't have a point of view on that as Amnesty, but I can tell you I don't think that in and of itself is going to change any of what we're kind of seeing on the ground. So the next month could not be happening, and I don't think it will change what's happening. That doesn't mean that the international community doesn't need to do anything. I just don't hold out a lot of hope that next month is relevant, particularly.
Natalie, can I give you the last word there on this?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Sasha. I think what we will see, at least because of the massive mobilisation of the public across the world, it hasn't just been, in the UK, we've seen a huge public mobilisation. You do a survey in the UK, and overwhelmingly people want this to stop. Overwhelmingly, people think that Israel has gone too far. Whether they believe it's a genocide or not, they believe that Israel is, the actor that needs to stop here, and it needs to stop now. And I think they've put a lot of pressure on, in the UK, on the UK government. I'm seeing that, I speak to my colleagues around the world, they're seeing the same. Every country is seeing the same. They're seeing this massive sort of public demonstrations, this massive movement of people saying this needs to stop now. And our narrative next week for the General Assembly is that doctors can't stop a genocide, but world leaders can. However, I do also, on the other hand, agree with Sasha. I'm not optimistic that will happen. I think there will be some declarations of support for a Palestinian state, other things that don't really commit any of those world leaders to actually doing anything. And I think what's important is for all of us and around the world to kind of really outline to our leaders who are going to represent us at that General Assembly, what do we want them to say, and hold them to account. We said, we get the option to vote them in and vote them out, but, we also get the option to communicate with them and say, we want you to say this, we want you to go further. And I'm optimistic at least that we'll see some people making some stronger statements than we would have done maybe a year ago. I don't think they'll go far enough.
And there, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to leave it for this evening. I'd like to thank, of course, MSF's Executive Director, Dr. Natalie Roberts, Amnesty International's Chief Executive here in the UK, Sasha Deshmukh, MSF's Project Coordinator, Caroline Williman, and journalist Yara Eden. especially to you all for attending this evening. Thank you for your time and your company.
Why should we support rules-based order in institutions such as the UN? It allowed life-threatening genocide to take place for the last 2 years, but also for settler colonialism being supported by the United Nations for the last 77 years since 1948. These states that are the heads of the rules-based order have allowed these things to happen. Why should we even support their existence in the first place?
I'm actually going to take that question because, as you know from our panel, they are organisations, they're not politicians. And as a journalist, it's a type of question that is often asked by a contributor. And as an anchor, I will play devil's advocate on both things. I think we should have a politician here on the panel, yet we don't. When you try and get a politician to speak, and I can speak from an Al Jazeera point of view, having been an employee and been a news anchor, you try and get an Israeli politician onto a channel like news on Al Jazeera, they won't come because they know we'll take them to task. We get lots of Palestinian politicians and we take them to task. We've had Hamas on our channel. I say our channel. Etisham, you'll back me up here. He's head of corporate affairs at Doha. He knows me very well, and I've taken them to task. I've never given them an easy ride, whether it's Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. We are, all of us, have been born into an era with that rules-based scenario of the UN General Assembly, the Security Council, and some of us, the EU. But in terms of what we see at the UN, until the UN themselves get their own house in order, and countries such as India and other countries with large populace that want to be part of that larger group of the Security Council, if it is ever expanded, is something that they have to sort out. Politicians in respective capitals have to actually, I should say, get together, talk and be on the same page. We haven't seen that since even before the First World War. So, it's easy to say that we should use the right language, but to try and say, why should we approve of a rules-based order? This is what we've been given. So until the public, but until the public at large tells its politicians, until the public at large, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying that until let me have my say. Until the population. Yeah, well, I'm trying to give you the explanation to. I'm trying to give you the explanation to your question.
We don't follow this world order. Western media outlets could learn a thing or two from the journalists in Gaza who oppose this system every single day and who have taught us how to fight for our rights. There are people resisting. These systems do not work. We've seen they do not work, so it's our responsibility as people of conscience to fight against them and to make change. We've seen dozens of freedom flotillas go out. I don't think it's fair for you to talk about language, and we should be using the right language.
Okay.
Palestinians are saying to use the right language. It's just frustrating to hear these things.
We have been, well, we certainly talked about it here, but nobody's arguing with you about that. But it's up to the people. No, I'm saying nobody's arguing with you. What I'm saying is it's up to the people of respective countries and the populace to actually demand of their politicians what they want. We have been dealt this hand, whatever this hand is in this particular country or in France or in Germany or in Brazil. It's up to those countries to try and push, as we're seeing Brazil getting heavily involved, South Africa getting very heavily involved in the ICJ. I agree with what you say, but again, as it was mentioned here before, it's also the ownership of those media companies that need to be taken to task. And who do they talk to? They talk to the politicians because the politicians want their support at various elections as time goes on. The media is a very influential and very strong institution, but there has to be, as you say, a fine balance about what is the correct terminology to use in situations like this. It's not for me at the moment to actually be able to change that. I can't do it by myself. It takes a whole organisation to do it. And sometimes when people continue to follow and watch and comment on what media organisations do, there is change. You know, we've seen it with people criticising the BBC, both from within the BBC and from out of it. That's just one organisation. But I agree with what you're saying. It's good to hear your voice, and it's good to get your opinion out, because we'll all go home and talk about it as the days progress. But I'm going to finish it there, madam, because we all have homes to go to as well, and I think that we have the panel here. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.